There once was this very kind woman who came to me. She was a bit frustrated and not understanding why she constantly found herself getting angry with her partner. "I don't get it," she said. "I'm always clear about what I want and what I don't like, but still, he crossed my boundaries and it doesn't seem to hear me, again and again. He's so stupid for not understanding and respecting me. And it's not until I explode that he seems to get the message. And then we're fighting, and he's wondering why I suddenly get so angry." I listened carefully and asked her, "Do you only feel this way with him?" She paused, thinking deeply. "No, actually maybe not," she mumbled. "Sometimes I also feel this way with my friends too." She continued, looking down at the floor. "And at work, like that time when my colleague messed up again and had to stay late to fix everything. I got angry, and my colleagues were surprised by what happened to me." I nodded and asked her, "How exactly do you set your boundaries? How do you tell people what you need or don't want?" She sighed. "Well, usually I say something like, 'Sorry to bother you, but I'm not sure if I like this.' Or in case of staying late that evening, I said, 'I wish there had been another option so I wouldn't have to stay late again.' That's clear, right?" She asked me with a bit of uncertainty in her eyes. Ah, there it was. She got this light bulb moment. Because here's what's happening. Sometimes we think we are very clear, but to the other person, our boundary is practically invisible. If we soften our words too much, or bury our real feelings in polite phrases, people won't always get it. They might not even realize that you're setting a boundary. For example, what one person might say is, "I'm fed up with this, it needs to stop." Another person might phrase more delicately, "I prefer if we didn't." And if we often cushion those statements with things like, "I don't want to offend you, but," or "I hope this doesn't upset you, but here's the truth. The other person can't read your mind. Whether you've been married for 30 years or working with someone for a decade, nobody can guess what your boundaries are unless you state them clearly. And setting boundaries, that's your responsibility, not theirs. If you often feel overwhelmed, frustrated, or constantly agreeing to things you don't want to do, or don't feel people listen to what you do or don't want, it's very likely you're not setting strong enough boundaries. When you don't clearly express where your limits are, the result can be a feeling of being ignored, disrespected, or powerless. The reason why this woman I mentioned keeps exploding in anger is because when you feel unheard, it's like you're swallowing your emotions. You can think of those suppressed emotions like a bicycle tire being pumped with air. A little air helps you ride smoothly. Just like we don't need to express every single emotion. But if you keep pumping air into the tire, eventually it will burst. Setting boundaries prevents that explosion. And here's the tricky part. When you don't assert your boundaries, you might even start doubting yourself. You might begin to question your own judgment. Maybe I'm overreacting, you might think, because the other person seems fine with it. And this can spiral into insecurity, making it even harder to trust yourself. So boundaries aren't just important for your well-being, they're crucial for others too. If you're not clear about what is and what is not acceptable, people won't fully understand how to interact with you. We all come from different backgrounds, and what's acceptable to one person might be unacceptable to another. This is why setting boundaries is so essential. It helps others understanding where the line is, and it protects your own peace of mind. If you want to learn how to set boundaries more effectively, here's a powerful exercise, a small one, that starts by recognizing the different categories that demands boundary setting. Let's start with the first category, things that are barely acceptable, those small annoyances. For instance, when somebody interrupts you during a conversation, or when you got unsolicited advice. It's irritating, but most of the time you brush it off like, who cares? It's something you can tolerate. And then we move to things that are unacceptable. These are the behaviors you cannot overlook. Things like lying, being disrespected, or when somebody breaks a promise. These are things you can't tolerate. You feel it deeply, and you know it's not okay. Next, we have terrible behavior, which cuts deeper. Things like verbal aggression or discrimination. These don't just hurt in a moment. They chip away at your sense of self-respect. You carry the weight of these experiences long after they happened. And finally, there's the completely intolerable. These are actions that no one should ever have to tolerate. physical or sexual abuse, or serious threats or harassments. These cross a line that must never be crossed. They're not just unacceptable, they're just not okay. And you should never hesitate to take action when these boundaries are violated. Well, the first step in all of this is to clearly define what kind of behavior fits into each category for you. Because this can vary from person to person. For example, where do cursing, drugs use, or alcohol consumption fit for you? And what about somebody ignoring you by walking away in the middle of an argument? My advice is to write down your personal boundaries for each category. When you've done that, you can go to the next step. And that is taking a good look on how you normally respond. Think back to that moment in life when you encountered these kind of behaviors. How exactly did you react when somebody interrupted you, for example, or lied to you? Or maybe did something even worse. What words did you use? It's so important to reflect on these moments because recognizing how you responded in the past is key to sharpening your boundaries for the future. And once you know where you stand, that's when you can start making a real change. Because here's the thing, being heard doesn't start with the other person understanding you. It starts with you being clear about what is and isn't acceptable. The next step is to evaluate if you could slightly change some words and add a certain attitude for the use or response you give to each category. So it's about the words and the attitude. What could be changed? Think about the person you think is very good at setting borders and be inspired how they would speak and what kind of behavior they would have in those specific situations. Once you've done that, to conclude, and I hope you've written down everything now, the categories, the behaviors of others, and your typical response to situations within those categories, I want to ask you to take one final step. Now take your responses and shift them upwards. Move your response from unacceptable to barely acceptable. And move the terrible response to unacceptable. And the completely intolerable response to terrible. What you will notice is that there's no longer a response left for completely intolerable. And that's intentional. Because most people rarely encounter situations that fall into this extreme category, and we hope you never do. And this small exercise isn't about handling those extreme situations. Those require a very different approach. Instead, it's about strengthening your responses to everyday challenges, so you can set clearer boundaries before things ever escalate to that far. But by shifting your boundaries and responses, you're now addressing smaller infractions with a level of clarity and assertiveness that will stop problems from escalating. Take a moment to reflect. How would it feel to respond with these stronger boundaries the next time you face a situation in one of these categories? What would change for you? Think about the power and confidence that would come with expressing yourself this way.